Hello, I'm here to read another chapter from my book, Lessons from Life, and we're dealing with the Sermon on the Mount. We've got to the part in Matthew chapter 6 where Jesus is saying, take no thought for your life, what you eat, what you drink, what you put on. But today we're going to deal with the issue about tomorrow, because he said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Worldly Christians seek their kingdom now. We seek a kingdom to come. If we lay up treasure on earth and live for this life, our lives are dominated by covetousness. If we lay up treasure in heaven and live for the coming kingdom, our lives are clothed in contentment. So here's some reasons why it's wrong to take thought for tomorrow. 1, tomorrow never comes. We rob ourselves of today's blessings and opportunities. If procrastination is the thief of time, then anxiety about tomorrow is more so. 2, it's the spirit of independence that says, I'll run my own life the way I want to. I'll control my future and decide my life. 3, it stops God providing for us. If we're controlling and taking care of every aspect of our life and future, God will not and cannot intervene in our lives. The rich young ruler was trapped by his riches. If he had given it all away, as Jesus told him, he'd have then known God's provision. He missed the greatest opportunity he ever had. And 4, today has enough trouble. It'll take all our effort and concentration to live a holy life today. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Don't do God's job for him. Your earthly future is God's business. Let's take in that, isn't it? Well, we've all heard that good maxim, start off as you mean to go. And most of us try to do this, I suppose. But I think a better maxim would be, mean to go on as you start off. For this is so much more difficult. We all started off right, as vulnerable, dependent babies, relying on parents or guardians for every single thing. But the older we got, the more independent we became, until in the majority of cases, we regarded any form of help as charity, preferring to solve problems and situations in our own way. For the worldly man, this attitude is usually regarded as good. It makes him a fighter, a survivor. But I believe this is not how God intends Christians to think. Sometimes I look at my cats and I observe how content they are with food, a home, and the occasional stroke. I'm sure they'd get better treatment in other homes where there were no little children trying to dress them up in dolls' clothes or stick yoghurt cartons on their ears as mine did when they were young. But the cats never tried to escape, and they were so peaceful, even when the children were playing really noisily. They were amazing. They can sleep nearly all day. They have no worries. My children also had no worries. When they were hungry, they made sure I knew about it, but they never worried about whether or not food would be in the cupboard. They expected I would come up with something. They never once asked me whether we could afford to pay the bills for food, electricity, telephone. They were secure in their trust that the dad and I would look after them. It's good that we learn to take responsibility. And a good parent or guardian will make sure that their children are taught to do so. My parents did a great job with me. For although I was only 16 years old when I left home, I made sure that out of my pittance of a wage, I'd pay my rent before I did anything else. I also knew that I had to pay my tithes to God, otherwise I'd never be able to get through the week on what was left. I really needed God to help me, and so I decided that I'd never rob him, no matter how short of money I was. And God was very good to me. My attitude was bad when I first left home, and consequently I was dismissed from maybe 5 or 6 jobs, the first ones I had. But God helped me and always found me work in time to pay my next week's rent. But I was even more blessed by the fact that he tirelessly worked on my attitude so that he didn't have to keep bailing me out. I remember the day I got married and the relief that I felt when it dawned on me that someone else could take responsibility for me. In some ways, I think it's great being a wife, as it's reasonable to expect that your husband should take care of you, which makes it easier to put your trust in God because you're already practicing on your husband, or at least you should be. It's not so easy for a man as from childhood he's been impressed that it's his role to take on the responsibility of a wife and family, and so he should. But where does that responsibility end? We have to play our part today, but tomorrow is God's concern. Some years ago, I learned a very valuable lesson. Maurice and I had a little 4-track recording studio, but we used to transport and use our instruments and PA equipment in various locations as we travelled around. And because of this, we took out a special and, may I add, very costly musicians insurance, which covered our equipment for anywhere in the UK. Well, one day we'd set up our equipment in a church, gone home for our dinner, and when we came back to the church ready for the meeting in the evening, we found that it had all been stolen. Inconvenient for the night, yeah, but no problem because we were insured, or so we thought. The man who'd actually sold us the insurance policy was so desperate to make a sale that he'd deceived us by misquoting the small print. Thus the insurance company got out of the contract and we had nothing to show for our money. Well, immediately I wrote off all insurance companies and classed them as legal rogues. Maurice got the message. Why put your trust in the world when you're serving God? He determined that he would never buy insurance again unless it was against the law not to, like with car insurance. We've been tested on this decision many times. In previous talks, I shared about our equipment being stolen the second time and showed that God had allowed it to be taken so that he could redirect both Maurice and I in our ministry. Indeed, we've had numerous thefts and other lessons have needed to be learned. Yet we still maintain that no thief can come near us unless God allows them to. What would the outcome have been if Job, having been stripped of everything, had said to his wife, "No problem, love. We're insured with the Abbey National Insurance Company. We can claim it all back and we'll get better next time." God would not have been able to prove anything to Satan if Job had been insured by the world. We have to make ourselves vulnerable for God to be able to see what's in our hearts. When I was living on my own in a flat and working for a temporary services bureau, they didn't provide me with holiday or sickness benefit, which meant that I was only paid for the specific hours I worked. Christmas and bank holidays were a nightmare as I was forced to be out of work and I couldn't afford to take holidays. I worked for the bureau for about 10 years and I can only remember taking 1 week of sick leave when God needed to teach me something which changed the whole course of my life. I often went to work feeling lousy and dreading the day, but by the time I'd got involved with my work, the sickness would be forgotten. I found out from experience that you can either indulge in your under-the-weather feelings or shake them off by dwelling on something else. Romans 8 verse 11 says, "The Spirit of God can quicken your mortal flesh." I know that no sickness can come on me unless God allows it, to either get my attention or teach me something. And so I've decided to put my complete trust in God. Well, for this very reason, Maurice and I refuse to allow any of our children to be vaccinated with any preventative medicines. And we've never given them antibiotics. When my children were small, I've taken them to the doctors when they were sick to find out what was wrong with them, but I didn't give them anything other than Calpol as a rule. Thus we allowed them to build up their own resistance to sickness. You know, when I was pregnant with my children, I was amazed to learn that no matter what was wrong with me during my pregnancy, I was not allowed to take any medication other than paracetamol, as I was warned that everything has side effects, Mrs. Barratt, and could harm the baby you're carrying. In fact, one midwife informed me that the remedy for high blood pressure, not that I suffered with it, but it was a period of fasting on water. The doctors were so anxious to protect the unborn baby. And yet, they'll give us whatever we ask for as a quick remedy without worrying about the possible consequences any side effects could have when we're not pregnant. Why put ourselves and our children at risk? And to deny ourselves this facility is just another way of making ourselves vulnerable so that we can learn to put our trust in God. Maurice and I live completely by faith, with no income, and live entirely by donations, and have done for the past 35 years. We never make our needs public and never make appeals for funds. God is our source. Yet we sent our children to a private Christian school run by born-again believers who work with us as Christian parents to maintain a consistent lifestyle. We never had to face the threat of them being taught about other religions and false gods, no Halloween or Eid to combat, and certainly no worry of homosexual teachers, which has now become a case for sex discrimination in our pro-gay city of Manchester. Maurice and I don't have a little nest egg put to one side for our children. Instead, we provided for their futures by investing our money in Christian education and daily opportunities to witness God's wonderful provision. In 2005, Maurice and I were seeking the Lord for a week and were having a time of prayer. As we spoke in tongues together, I had a vision, and I could see an archway, and we went to walk underneath it. But as I did so, I realised that it wasn't the archway to a tunnel, it was actually a boomerang, which was picked up and thrown out. Obviously, because it was a boomerang, it returned a short time later, as this is what boomerangs do. But God spoke to us and said that no matter where he sent us, no matter how dangerous the place may be, we'd always return in safety. And if, for any reason, his plan changed, he'd let us know beforehand. When I shared what I'd seen with Maurice, he looked up startled, because he'd just been praying in his heart and asking God whether we should be going to Plateau State in Nigeria, as we'd promised, because there'd been some persecution of the Christians and a death threat given to the pastor of a particular church in that area. Our finances had been very tight, and Maurice thought that maybe God was holding things up because he didn't really want us to go. But now that I'd received this vision, it had taken all the doubt away from him, and he was ready to get the visas and book the flights in faith. Now I was worried. Having a vision's one thing, but getting the interpretation is quite another, and this actually involved stepping out in faith and trusting God to be faithful to his word. Well, I went. In the year 2000, England experienced a petrol crisis, and countless petrol stations ran out of fuel. Although Maurice travels many miles each week, he didn't have to cancel one single meeting due to this problem. I didn't do as many miles as Maurice, but as I rarely listen to the radio, have no television and never buy newspapers, I'm usually totally unaware of the situation going on in the planet, therefore completely unprepared when a crisis occurs. Nevertheless, I prayed that God would look after us and that I would have enough petrol to take the children to and from school every day. After a few days, my petrol gauge was really low, and on the way to pick up the children, I saw a queue of cars waiting to be served at a petrol station, which had received a supply of fuel. I drove up to the entrance only to be met by two policemen who informed me that the petrol was reserved for people who worked in emergency services only, and they advised me just to try and get home on what was in my tank. Well, I picked up the children and headed for home, praying audibly in front of the children that God would not let the red petrol indicator go on until I could get petrol. And then the red indicator light went on just as I'd approached the petrol station that I'd passed previously. But this time there were no queue of cars, so I again pulled up to the entrance and was met by the same two policemen who immediately recognised me. "I've seen you before," one of them said as he came towards me. I apologised for coming again, but as there were no queue waiting, I had presumed that it was all right to fill up my tank. Then he put his head through the door window to see how much fuel I had. And then, to my complete surprise, he exclaimed, "I know you. you're a nurse. And he beckoned to his companion and he said, we know her, she's a nurse and she's left a pass at home. Come on, love, you can go and tell them at the counter that we sent you. I was so amazed, and so were the children who kept asking me if I was a nurse. Then Nathan, aghast, said, wow, Mum, you only just prayed and God answered straight away. But Isaac groaned laughingly because getting petrol meant that he still had to go to school the next day. God really had taken care of his tomorrow.